If you've ever wanted to soften part of a photo without ruining the original image, this tutorial is for you. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use the blur tool in Photoshop the right way, using a clean, non-destructive workflow so you can edit safely and fix things easily if you change your mind later. This is perfect for portraits, product shots, backgrounds, or any image where you want more control over what stays sharp and what gets softened. And if this video helps you out, make sure to hit like and subscribe for more Photoshop tutorials just like this. All right, let's jump in. The first thing you want to do is make sure you are not painting directly on your original photo. That is one of the biggest mistakes beginners make. If you blur straight onto the image layer, it becomes much harder to undo or refine later. So after opening your image in Photoshop, go down to the bottom of the Layers panel and click the plus icon to create a brand new empty layer above your photo. This keeps your original image protected while giving you a safe place to apply the blur effect. Now double-click the new layer name and rename it Blur Edit. This might seem like a small step, but staying organized in Photoshop makes a huge difference, especially when your files start getting more complex. Next, we need to select the Track tool. Look at the toolbar on the left side of Photoshop and find the Blur tool. It usually looks like a small raindrop icon. If you do not see it right away, don't worry. Photoshop hides some tools inside grouped icons, so click and hold on the Sharpen tool or the Smudge tool to reveal the Hidden Blur tool. Once you have selected it, look up at the top Options bar because this is where the important settings are. The first setting you want to check is Sample All Layers. Make sure that box is turned on. This is really important because it tells Photoshop to sample the image underneath while you paint on your empty Blur Edit layer. In other words, you are not damaging the original photo, but the tool still knows what to blur. Without this checked, the blur tool may not behave the way you expect on a blank layer. Now let's talk about strength. For best results, set the blur strength somewhere between 20 and 50%. I always recommend starting lower than you think you need. It is much easier to build the effect gradually than it is to overdo it in one pass. A softer buildup gives you more control and helps the blur look natural instead of harsh or fake. If you want a gentle background softening, stay on the lower end. If you need a stronger blur, you can increase it a bit, but still avoid jumping straight to 100%. After that, click the brush dropdown and choose a soft round brush, then set the hardness to 0%. This gives you smooth edges and helps the blur blend into the image without leaving visible brush marks. Hard edges can make the effect look obvious and messy, so a soft brush is usually the safest choice for most edits. If you need to cover a larger area, you can always adjust the brush size as you go. Now it's time to paint the blur. Make sure your Blur Edit layer is still selected in the Layers panel. This part matters because you want all the changes to go onto the blank layer, not onto the original photo. Use the bracket keys on your keyboard to quickly adjust the brush size. Press the left bracket to make the brush smaller and the right bracket to make it larger. This shortcut is super useful because it lets you stay focused while editing without constantly opening menus. Once your brush is the right size, left-click and paint over the area you want to soften. Move slowly and carefully, especially around faces, text, or detailed edges, where you want the blur to look clean and controlled. If the blur does not feel strong enough after the first pass, just release the mouse and paint over the same area again. You can repeat this 2 or 3 times to stack the effect gradually. That is one of the best things about using this method. You are in control of how much blur gets added, instead of committing to one extreme adjustment. If you go too far, do not panic. That is why using a separate layer is so helpful. You can always reduce the intensity later instead of starting over. To fine-tune the result, go back to the Layers panel and select your Blur Edit layer. Then lower the opacity slider until the effect looks more natural. For example, you might bring it down to around 70%, or even lower depending on the image. This is a great way to make the blur blend more smoothly with the rest of the photo and avoid that overly processed look. When you combine a separate layer, the right brush settings, and careful opacity control, the blur tool becomes a lot more powerful and a lot easier to use. It gives you a simple way to soften specific areas without affecting the whole image, and it keeps your workflow flexible in case you need to make changes later. So that's how to use the blur tool in Photoshop the smart way. If this tutorial helped you, please give it a like, subscribe for more Photoshop tips and editing tutorials, and leave a comment if you want to see more beginner-friendly guides. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.